What's going on, guys? Felix here on Shopify Masters Podcast and Podcasting Secrets. And today I want to talk to you about a very common response I hear in all of these podcasting Facebook groups, which is that when anyone comes in asking for tips and advice on how to make money with their podcast, the hordes come out and will say how they are doing it wrong. They're not focused on the right things, and then you should not start a podcast if you're thinking about making money. You should not even think about making money with a podcast. And today I'm going to talk to you about why that is the wrong approach to thinking about it, and that you should be thinking about how to make money with your podcast. And actually, you should be thinking about it as soon as possible. So here's why it's important. When you are launching anything, a business, a project, a podcast, it is so key. Your main goal for a lot of us is that you want to actually put out a message to the world. You want to help people. You want to put out something that actually has worth, has value in the world, right? Because for me, for a long time, when I started my podcast, I was looking for outlet. I was looking for something that I could actually see myself making progress with. I want to see something that I was building an audience with. I want to see, can I actually put out something to the world that people wanted to consume? Like, it was really important for me to just know that I was actually able to create some kind of value in the world. You know, whether that means like building an app or building a website or just getting a podcast out there or a blog, even something that will get people to tune in and want to tune in and get value out of it, that will subscribe to it. It was important to me to validate almost that I was worthy of producing some kind of content. I was worthy of producing something that people found worthy. And I think for anyone out there that is building a business or starting a podcast because they want to spread their message, or maybe is to as a promotion vehicle or marketing vehicle for their other products or their other services, it's important that you know and can validate that you can actually build an audience. So I agree. Yes, you need to have some passion in the thing that you're focused on and the message that you're putting out there. But this poisonous thought that people put in your head about how you should not be thinking about making money, or that you should not even consider it, or just get out of your mind if you're thinking about making money with a podcast, is wrong. Because the thing is that you need sustainability. You cannot serve the world. You cannot serve your audience. You cannot serve your business. You cannot serve anybody without the lifeblood, which is needs to have revenue. You need to be able to produce revenue to grow your podcast. So that's the reason why I totally disagree with anyone out there that says, not to think about money when it comes to your podcast. And if you think about it, anyone that starts a business, starts a charity even, there is not, you cannot run anything endlessly without any resources, right? So you have to be able to have resources. You need to have resources that you can continue to put back into your podcast. So I give you the story about how me generating revenue with my podcast has changed everything for me. So when I started my podcast, I was just hustling myself. I was putting in my own time. I was even putting my own money just to kind of get this thing rolling, and hiring people to help me out with editing, hiring people to help me get this thing off the ground, hiring virtual assistants to help me produce the show notes, put together the blogs and everything. And eventually got to a point where it was picking up its own steam. And actually getting an audience, building an audience quickly with the Shopify Masters podcast. And then I started recognizing that there were people out there that were willing to pay to get in front of my audience, because my podcast was very niche. It was very specific to solving a very specific audience's problems. It was called the Shopify Masters podcast, and it was teaching people that are on Shopify how to grow their Shopify businesses. So a lot of vendors, app developers wanted to get in front of their audience. And we jump back to one of my most previous episode of the Podcasting Secrets podcast. I talk about why it's important to niche down, how to niche down. And this is why it's important, because when you niche down, you're much more closer to the money. You're much closer to showing that you have value, that your podcast is valuable in order to generate money from sponsors, from selling your own products. It all comes down to picking a small niche. So once I was able to actually generate an audience, generate some money from a podcast, I was able to put it back into the podcast. I was able to hire people to help promote it. I was hire people to help create the infrastructure. I was able to hire people to help edit it, because I was spending like 10 hours on each of these episodes. Spending 10 hours, I was burning myself out, and I've been podcasting for 5 years now. But I did take a break at one point for about a month and a half because I was burnt out from spending 10 hours a day or 10 hours per episode on each podcast, and I was about to give up. And if I gave up, I would not have been able to create a 1 million download podcast, or almost 2 million download per year podcast at this point. I would not be able to reach over hundreds of thousands of people that are subscribers. I would have like people that come on my podcast now that I interview that are now successful Shopify merchants that told me that they started listening to the podcast when they were starting from scratch, like zero zero, like no followers, no customers, no revenue, no business, but they listen to the podcast, they got inspired by it, spent a couple years growing it. Some have grown to multi-6-figure, multi-7-figure businesses, and all started with the podcast. And can you imagine that if you started something amazing, but you didn't have any cash, you got burnt out because you were doing it all yourself, or you couldn't put any cash back into the business to reinvest into the podcast to make it better, to reinvest in better equipment, to reinvest in better software, to reinvest in and hiring help so you can focus on what you're really good at. If I didn't have all of that, this podcast would not have gone to where it's at today, would not be able to spread the message and add all this value back out to the world. So that is why it's so key that you have to think about a podcast that can actually generate revenue from the beginning. Not because you want to only make money from your podcast. Yes, you have to be something that has to be something you're passionate about. But if you don't have revenue coming in, you cannot reinvest back into you. You cannot grow or amplify your message. You cannot help more people. So, where this idea of don't do it for the money comes from? Like this repeated phrase, like don't do it for the money, do it for the passion first, and the money comes later. I heard this so much back in the days with blogging. Heard this so much back in the days with YouTube, where everyone said the same thing. It's like, oh, don't do it for the money, don't do it for the money. And guess what? Who's the most powerful today? Who's the biggest people today? These are people that are passionate, but also very business focused. They know and understand the power of money and how it can amplify their voice and build up their community and build the community better. So I think that these are the same people that are saying, maybe not the same exact people, but the same kind of attitudes that people have that are saying the same thing about podcasting, that you should not be thinking about making money, that it's not a place where you think about making money. But it's super, super important to start thinking about that, because again, with money for your podcast, with money coming for your podcast, it means even more resources to spread your message. So here's what I would do differently. So I don't think you necessarily, if you're starting out your podcast, you don't necessarily have to think about how to monetize, but at least know that your podcast topic, your podcast idea is actually monetizable. And the best way to do that is just find other places where people are selling information about the topic that your podcast is covering. That could be as simple as people selling books about the topic, ideally selling courses, or people that are hiring coaches or hiring services or hiring people to help them learn the topic that you're teaching. Or maybe there are conferences that go on. Maybe there are actual brick and mortar businesses that serve the type of audience that you're going after. Just knowing that alone is enough to know that your podcast eventually can be monetizable, and then you can think about later how to monetize it. But you never go into a field that's not monetizable, not because it's not something you can do for fun, but trust me, it's not going to be nearly as sustainable if you cannot have some money coming back into it so you can reinvest in growing and amplifying your voice. And if you truly care about your message, truly care about the audience, it is not selfish to think about how you can make money from this, because with money again comes resources which can be reinvested back into your business to amplify your voice and build up your community. So hope it helps you out. For anyone out there that if you're thinking about starting a podcast and you want to find out how can you make this sustainable, how can you make it monetizable, how can you do this full time, don't listen to the haters out there that are telling you that you should not be thinking about making money. It's so important to think about it, because it is what will make your message sustainable. It's what will make your podcast sustainable. It's what has made my podcast sustainable for the last 5.5 years, by having resources to reinvest back into it. So hopefully it helps you out, and believe that it is possible, because it is possible to make money with your podcast. But you cannot do it if you're listening to all these people out there that are telling you that you cannot. So hopefully it helps you out. I'll talk to you guys.